So something else that I came across that I wanted to share with all of you today was there was a journalist who wanted to do some research on the teams, the greatest teams in the history of sports, and what was it that made them successful. And it initially started off as an article, but became a book because there was so much research that went into it. And his name was Sam Walker, and he was able to distill it down to about 16 teams. And these 16 teams had sustained success. They were dynasties. They just didn't win a championship once or a few championships. They had sustained success. And what made them great? And I want you to try to guess what made them great. Was it the great coach, perhaps? Was the owner fantastic? Did they have a general manager that was like Billy Beane from Moneyball, just metrics and on top of everything? Was it rock star talent, or an unlimited budget, or a great fan base? Like what was it that made them great? And ultimately, what Sam Walker found out was they had all exceptional captains. Now, what's interesting about this, if you look at the list of these captains, they don't stand out as being great players necessarily with great talent. Like, for example, you've got various, and this was across various sports and countries. It wasn't limited to the US or certain sports. It was football, it was baseball with the New York Yankees, it was rugby with the New Zealand All Blacks, basketball, handball in France. And Sam Walker found that there was the consistent thread amongst all these great teams was they had an exceptional captain, but the captain wasn't necessarily the most talented player on these teams. So what talents do you think they had? Take some guesses. Here they are. So they all had these qualities in common. And I recommend the book. It's called The Captain Class by Sam Walker. It started off as a sports book, but has been embraced by the business community as insightful for leadership. And I recommend it for all of you. But these were essentially the qualities that, these were essentially the qualities that made them stand out. And I want to go into, I'm not going to cover, we don't have enough time to really go into each of them, but some of them I think are more applicable than others to what we're trying to achieve in terms of high performing teams in the business world. So let's dive in. Tenacity and focus. These individuals, these captains, they rarely were the most talented, but they had this tireless commitment to perform at their highest potential. And that involved conditioning and preparation. And there's this concept called social loafing. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a phenomenon where people tend to exert less effort to achieve a goal when they're working in a group as opposed to working alone. And the antidote to social loafing is when there's one person in that group that's giving 100%. And these captains did that. They gave 100%. And that rubbed off on the rest of the team and elevated everyone. So tenacity and focus was one of the key traits. The other one was that they led from the back. They shunned attention. They did not care about how they were perceived by the outside world. And they remained entirely focused on internal dynamics of the team. And I love this quote by Nelson Mandela, who I consider to be one of the greatest leaders of all time. And he states here, a leader is like a shepherd. They stay behind the flock, letting the most nimble go out ahead, whereupon the others follow, not realizing that all along they are being directed from behind. And these captains, they led in that way from behind. Another trait that I want to talk about, well, let me give an example of Carla Overbeck before we go to the next trait. She was the captain of the U.S. women's soccer team. And here's a quote from her where she says, "I never cared about getting my name in the paper. As long as the team won, I was happy. I didn't care about TV shows. I was actually happy that they didn't ask me to do interviews." So this is an example of someone who had that type of humility and didn't really, that shunned attention. And the next time, what I recommend, the tip here is next time you interview a candidate, screen for these qualities, these intangibles: positive attitude, can-do attitude, humility, and work ethic. They were vocal. So again, the interesting part and the interesting point here is that they were not motivational speakers. They didn't give that speech at halftime that you see in the movies, and they were often inarticulate, but they were consistently vocal, and they listened as much as they spoke. And this Tim Duncan was one of those captains, and you see the picture of him giving instructions to a teammate, and his coach describing him. He didn't judge people. He tried to figure out who they were, what they do, and what their strengths were. He was just he had a very good sense about people, and that's really what these captains did. They fostered a culture of communication. So leaders, I like this quote: leaders who don't listen will eventually be surrounded by people who have nothing to say. And if you've ever seen this, there's a very interesting and funny video about it's not about the nail. I recommend you Google it. I don't have time to go into it, but essentially when the tip here is when seeking your team's feedback, don't give your opinion first. Because it's going to ultimately influence the advice that you get. So try to withhold that. The other quality that these captains had was they challenged the status quo. So even though they might have had that quiet communication style, an individual communication style, they did not feel shy when it came to speaking truth to those in power, even if it felt uncomfortable. They did it because they knew it was for the benefit of the team. They avoided groupthink. And to me, it reminded me of a book called Radical Candor that I also recommend, by Kim Scott, where she talks about the qualities of the most effective leaders and managers is that they care personally and challenge directly. And the thing that I always try to remember is that the absence of conflict isn't always harmony. It's often apathy. And that we want to focus on attacking the problem and not the individual people. So one of the tips that I try to remember for myself here is to encourage debate, not just encourage debate on my team, but reward it. Let them know that that it's not only okay to push back, but they should, in order to avoid path dependency. And that's when we're on a path and we think that we should stay on it because this is the path that we've always been on. But these leaders, these captains, they challenge that, and that's something that we should emphasize